Suspended but not scrapped. Anger over Hong Kong's controversial extradition bill isn't going away, and protesters are demanding the territory's leader step down. So, how will Hong Kong deal with growing public discontent? And how is it viewed in China? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finnegan. A controversial extradition law has been suspended in Hong Kong, but protesters say that's not enough. The bill would allow suspects to be sent to mainland China for trial. The demonstrators have demanded that it be scrapped completely and now want the territory's leader, Carrie Lam, to step down too. The chief executive serves like a prime minister and is chosen by committee, but that committee is made up of mainly pro-Beijing politicians and business leaders. Their one country, two systems governance deal with China was meant to protect Hong Kong's semi-autonomous status. But protesters say their freedoms are under threat and that they'll fight to keep them. Rob McBride reports from Hong Kong.
If the Hong Kong government thought its last-minute back-down would keep more people at home, this was Hong Kong's answer. Protesters filled the length of the route of the march and spilled over into adjoining streets. Well before the scheduled start time, the crowds began forming at the starting point. They say Hong Kong's freedoms within China are being further eroded and are calling on the chief executive, Carrie Lam, to quit.
We will not stop until we get true democracy in Hong Kong. Because even if Carrie Lam stepped down, the system is still unfair. We do not have true democracy. We do not have fair election.
Most protesters wore black to show their anger towards Lam and the Hong Kong police. And many carried white flowers in memory of a man who fell to his death the night before the march while putting up a protest banner. The incident adding to a sense of bitterness towards a government they say doesn't listen to them.
I don't think the government will listen to us, but at least we have to stand out.
Does Carrie Lam support your city?
Do you think it supports our city? That's the biggest joke in the world.
They have a joke with us, so I think the government is very bad now.
This is the second major march in as many weeks, protesting against a controversial extradition bill the government has been trying to introduce. Critics say it would allow China to extradite political opponents to face summary trial in mainland courts. Protesters want that bill withdrawn altogether. And they're also angry at the way the police dealt with last week's occupation of streets around the local Legislative Council building. The organisers have made this not just about the extradition bill, but also a protest against what they say was the excessive use of force by police in breaking up what was largely a peaceful demonstration last Wednesday, some of the most violent scenes on Hong Kong streets in years. Carrie Lam has promised to consult more closely with Hong Kong people over the proposed legislation and insists she hears their voices. Today, it must be difficult not to hear them. Rob McBride, Al Jazeera, Hong Kong.
So let's introduce our panel for today's discussion. From Hong Kong, we're joined by Emily Lau, former chairperson of Hong Kong's Democratic Party. From Beijing, Aina Tangen, a political analyst specialising in China. And from Nottingham, Steve Tsang, director of the China Institute at the School of Oriental and African Studies. Good to have you with us, all of you. Emily, let's start with you. How much longer can Carrie Lam survive as Hong Kong's leader? Why are people so angry with her in particular?
Well, I don't know. I think the people who marched today, they all demanded her resignation and also, of course, demanded the withdrawal of the bill immediately. But unfortunately, she did not respond. In the evening, she did not even come out to meet the press. She just issued a statement saying, offering an apology. And that is too little too late. I think the people are very angry.
Steve Tsang, China's foreign ministry has publicly backed Lam. She says that China's leaders have confidence in my judgment and will support me. Is Beijing going to sack her?
Beijing will get her removed before the end of her term, but Beijing will not remove her right away. There is a need for Beijing to save face, and therefore they will have to officially endorse Carrie Lam. But if Beijing really were fully behind Carrie Lam would not have backed down yesterday and basically suspended the bills indefinitely.
Aina Tangen, you've heard what both Steve and Emily said there. How embarrassing is this climb down for Beijing? Was it instigated by Beijing?
Highly doubtful. I mean, Beijing is trying to keep an eye on the situation. They rely on Carrie Lam to take control and to manage things. And I think they're deeply disappointed. I would agree with my colleague from England that this is going to be a situation where they will back her now, but probably look for a replacement before the term has ended.
Emily, after Sunday's protests, what happens next? Will public anger in Hong Kong subside? Will the legislation, do you think, be brought back once things have calmed down? Or will it be allowed to rot, like 2003's Article 23 National Security Law?
Well, if Carrie Lam refuses to withdraw the bill as soon as possible, I think the anger will not subside. And it is very stupid. And I understand that the pro-Beijing legislators are also very nervous. And one of them cried, according to a newspaper, when they had a meeting yesterday, because they were very afraid there are elections coming up, local elections in this November, and then Legislative Council election in September next year. And they are very afraid that they will lose the election because they know that many Hong Kong people are hopping mad. So if Carrie Lam does nothing and just throw out an apology, I don't think that's enough. And I think the commotion, the anger, and the demonstrations will continue.
Emily, was this just badly thought out legislation, as Carrie Lam has implied, or do you suspect that there was something more sinister to it?
Well, I don't know. I think now, first of all, I think this thing was Carrie Lam's making, because I don't think Beijing foisted it on her. Carrie Lam used the Taiwan homicide case to say, oh, we want to find a solution, not just for the Taiwan case, but also for mainland and Macau. And she's totally underestimated the sensitivity of the issue and also the Hong Kong people's fear of the communists. And then when the whole thing now developed like this, of course, I think Beijing must be unhappy. At first, if they thought that she could solve the rendition problem, that's great. But now they saw that, you know, this whole thing has attracted so much international attention. And then today, they met the NPC delegates, the National People's Congress delegates, and the other rubber stamps went to the Chinese liaison office, and they told them, they said, oh, in the last few days, there were 68 statements issued by foreign governments. So, of course, they care about international public opinion. And I hope the international community will continue to look at what's happening in Hong Kong, and the media will continue to report war to war on what's happening here.
OK, we'll talk more about the international reaction in just a moment. First, Steve, I just want to clear up the situation surrounding Carrie Lam. Was this situation entirely of her own making? She says her only errors were in communication. She insists that she isn't Beijing's puppet. Was she encouraged, though, do you think, by Beijing to push this legislation through so quickly?
I think it is to a very, very large extent, Carrie Lam's own making. I really don't see Carrie Lam as just Beijing's puppet and doing exactly as she was told by Beijing. My reading is that Beijing gave a general instruction or request to Carrie Lam, which is to put in place the legal framework for the rendition of fugitive mainlanders who use Hong Kong as a safe haven for their ill-gotten gains. Then Carrie Lam make a very poor political judgment and widen the scope of the law, which would, in fact, make people in Hong Kong, as well as foreigners working in Hong Kong or even passing through Hong Kong, potentially subject to being renditioned to China to face Chinese jurisdiction. And that is where everything started going wrong. And she keep on making a huge number of mistakes in terms of, for example, the use of force by the police force and her refusal to apologize properly. And even when she made the statement to retract, she put the safety of police officers ahead of her citizens. This is not somebody who has any sense of what a political leader needs to be.
Aina Tangen, President Xi isn't a leader who tolerates failures by those around him, by officials. Do you honestly think that Lam's position is safe? Is it only a matter of time before she's replaced?
I already answered that earlier. I do think that there will be examination of exactly how she put this, but let's change the narrative a little bit. This idea that having an extradition treaty with Taiwan, Macau in China is 20 years overdue. This would be like Puerto Rico and the United States not having an ability to extradite murderers and rapists. Now, what was actually put on the table was quite reasonable. In fact, much more reasonable than the 20 other extradition treaties that Hong Kong has with other countries, including the United States. So the United States, the only threshold is that it's punishable by a year more. What was on the table by Carrie Lam, and I agree, she did not communicate it well, was this idea that nothing political, nothing involving tax or religion would be things. Any crime have to be punishable by more than 7 years. Hardly something that is threatening the daily existence of Hong Kong people. And then on the other hand, you have people like former legislator Lau of strident voices who are calling for all sorts of perceived wrongs, but there is absolutely no end game. This is lemmings running off a cliff and destroying Hong Kong in the process. Hong Kong's recent, over the last 20, 30 years, the reason they have done well is because of China acting as a gateway. Now it has different competitors in Shenzhen, Shanghai, even in Beijing in terms of the capital and financial markets. This is not the time to be rocking the boat. It should have been the time in which people like Ms. Lau should be telling people that you have to be practical about what the situation is. Hong Kong is part of China. It is not going to float away.
Emily Lau, what do you make of that?
Well, I think most of us accept that we are part of the People's Republic of China. And we want this policy of one country, two systems, which Beijing foisted on us. We didn't create it. Beijing foisted it on us, and Britain also agreed in 1997 when they handed us over to communist rule. But under one country, two systems, of course, Hong Kong should continue to thrive as an international business and financial center. But the people will also continue to enjoy the free lifestyles, personal safety, the rule of law, independence of the judiciary. These are things we enjoy under British colonial rule. And as Chris Patton said, just at the handover, the law was amended to ensure there's a firewall which separates us from the communist regime so that the Chinese legal system will not come into Hong Kong. But what this extradition bill proposes to do is to drive a truck through the firewall, create a big hole. Then we don't have our legal system anymore. So it's one country, one system. And the Hong Kong people, we want it to be a business and financial center, but we want our core values to be preserved. Personal safety, civil liberties, and the rule of law.
Steve Tsang, we're currently watching lemmings running to the cliff edge, says Aina Tangen. Look at London. There's nothing to stop people from relocating their operations post-Brexit when conditions change. The same is true of Hong Kong. What do you make of that?
I think that is a bit over the top, I'm afraid. Hong Kong is in a bit of a very tight corner at the moment. And I take my hats off to the people in Hong Kong in the way how they have been standing up for their own values and defending their way of life. And they have been defending it in a very reasonable way. The key reason why Xi Jinping and the Chinese government can back off over the current situation is that the demonstrators did not go on the streets to say, down with Xi Jinping. They did not say, we oppose the Communist Party. They simply said, we are here defending our basic values, our way of life, and the future of our children. Now, that is something which allows the Chinese government to tactically put the blame on Carrie Lam, who deserves it anyway, and allow the matters to eventually be resolved, turning it into a Hong Kong versus China issue will make it into a real crisis out of which there will be no winners.
Ina Tanga, what do you make of that? No winners. Are you saying that the people in Hong Kong don't appreciate how good China has been for them, Ina?
It's not. It's a question of economics. And I think there's a lot of misplaced aggression that is going on here. Quite frankly, the amount of money that has flowed into Hong Kong and created the kind of lifestyles and also the extremely high property values was not shared to the regular people. What you had is people at the very top have been wealthier and wealthier. They have done well from the system. Most of them have had cooperations or businesses in China, and they've done very well. But the rest of the people have just been suffering. Their real incomes have gone down. Employment is fairly dismal. They are well educated, but they do not have an outlet for that. So at this point, they're feeling that somebody is to blame. And I think that these pro-democracy groups are throwing out this idea that everything would be wonderful if they only had democracy, if China would only allow them to go their own way. And that is a pipe dream. It is a pipe dream that could lead to immense tragedy for a lot of these people. As I said, there are Pied Pipers out there who are trying to use this particular issue as part of a larger issue of saying that there should be an independent
Steve, I see you shaking your head there.
I think that is a complete misreading of what people in Hong Kong are doing. They are not there doing what was responding to a few pipers, getting them to jump off the cliff, which essentially is about opposing the Communist Party and introduce democracy and expect democracies to deliver a rose gardens to Hong Kong tomorrow. That's not what they are all about. They are about defending their existing way of life and their core values. They would like to have direct elections for the chief executive. But that's really as far as they really were pushing for it. And the current situation, in fact, vindicates them. If Carrie Lam had gone through an electoral process before she became chief executive, she would not make the kind of mistakes that were literally politically illiterate type of mistakes, which put Hong Kong into this current situation and damage the relationship between China and Hong Kong. China's interests would have been much better served if they allowed an electoral process to turn up with somebody who understands what needs to be done and is able to communicate effectively with people in Hong Kong, to carry the people with Hong Kong in moving in a direction which would be acceptable to both Hong Kong and to China. That is a position which is achievable, but not by somebody who is appointed by Beijing, but does not understand the politics of Hong Kong.
Emily Lau, Carrie Lam had pretty good approval ratings at the start of her term. To what extent was it a stumble or some sort of fall from grace, though only a matter of time? People accuse her of being arrogant. Is she?
Well, of course. I think that is no secret at all. Even within the government and in the community, she is described as exceedingly arrogant, very full of herself. And of course, she looks down on almost everybody. She thinks she is the brightest, she's the most intelligent person. and nobody else is worth listening to. And so it's very insufferable. But the trouble now shows that she's very incapable. And today a news report said the Chinese leadership is very unhappy with her and think that she's not capable at all. And so, and I think the pro-Beijing politicians are also mad at her. So she is really on a run.
And Aina Tangen, I mean, as far as China is concerned, and the international reaction that there's been to the protests in Hong Kong, with China's economy right now under pressure due to the ongoing trade war with the US, a possible meeting between President Trump and President Xi at the G20 summit in Japan. This couldn't have come at a worse time, could it? China can't afford any more international scrutiny like this, can it?
Well, I don't know if it's a question of scrutiny. I mean, for China, if you talk about core values, one of them is the integrity of the nation. What's happening here is you have a number of red lines and red buttons which are being crossed and pushed in the Taiwan Straits, in the South China Seas, now Hong Kong. There's also scrutiny in Xinjiang. It seems that within Beijing that they feel that they're being surrounded, that there are forces that are trying to attack them, and an all-pressure campaign. That's part of this kind of economic attack by the United States. And that is a very, very dangerous situation to be in. Beijing cannot see somebody trying to create a straw man out of Carrie Lam to in essence, insist, as my two colleagues say, that everything should be run democratically. Everything was run democratically, everything would be just fine. Well, if that was true, the world would be in much better shape today than it is currently.
Will these kind of protests?
Putting aside that myth,
will these kind of protests?
Beijing will not tolerate.
Will these kind of protests be tolerated after 2047?
Oh gosh, no. I mean, they're probably. We could be hitting an inflection point led by these kind of Pied Pipers who are saying, yes, everything will be fine. We can force democracy upon the mainland. And this is not about China versus Hong Kong. This is just about one individual. This is the kind of talk that leads to unintended consequences. And that is really what is at stake here.
Steve,
in the next few years, if this continues, it'll be tragedy.
All right, Steve, we'll give you the final word. To what extent do you think, I mean, the protests do have one eye on 2047, the protesters rather?
Well, China under the Communist Party is anti-democratic. It will not allow democratizations to happen in China. And at the end of the 50 years period, I think it's a reasonable assumption that they will expect Hong Kong to be much more like China. But we are still talking about another 28 years to go. As Harold Wilson once famously said, a week is a long time in politics. 28 years is eternity. There's much to play for. We do not know the direction of travel in China. The important thing is to keep Hong Kong continue on its current way for as long as is possible, and then we will see where it will go. People in Hong Kong need to act on that basis.
There we must end our discussion. Many thanks indeed to all of you. Emily Lau, Aina Tangen and Steve Tsang, thank you for watching. Don't forget you can see the programme again at any time just by going to the website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, though, join us at our Facebook page. You'll find that at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can join the conversation on Twitter, our handle at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finnegan, and the team here in Doha, thanks for watching. I'll see you again. Bye for now.